I always take people on a little bit of a track back through their life because I've done, of course, a lot of research on your life. And I want to take us back to the beginning because I always find that's a very good place to start. Or for you, maybe or maybe not, right? Because I heard that your youth there was a lot of tough times. Would you be comfortable sharing some of that?
Yeah, sure. Listen, everyone has had tough times, and you can be talking about kids who grew up chained to a radiator in the basement, and you can talk about kids that suffered some sort of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So it's all on a spectrum. I was very lucky in that I had parents that tried their best to love me and fed me. We didn't have a lot of money, but I had a roof over my head and I got educated. So there was a lot that was working. I was raised in the Baha'i faith. So I was raised in a very, what I would say, a beautiful and vital faith tradition. But yeah, my mom took off when I was about 2 years old. My dad remarried right away. So I was mostly raised by my stepmom and had a pretty kind of like emotionally absent dad. And then they were in a very, very unhappy marriage. So like a lot of us, I just grew up in a household that kind of pretended to be happy on the outside, but was really dysfunctional and alienated in its reality. So that is a great way to gaslight a child and caused me a lot of anxiety and self-esteem issues when I was younger. When I was older, it turned into some problems with alcoholism and addiction and anxiety attacks and depression. And that's the hand I was dealt. And you play the hand you're dealt and you work on it. And I did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of kind of research on spiritual paths, and I'm a lot better now than I was, but it's been a rocky road.
So I want to double click on that for a minute. What's interesting about my upbringing, and I share this a lot in the podcast so my listeners know, in fact, my first episode was with my mom. And I usually don't tell people who my mom is, but it's so like it matters so much in the course of this story because she ended up coming and banging down my door and kind of getting me out of that life. People would have never thought, like I had a very nice upbringing. And so when I actually got to recovery circles, I almost felt like, well, shit, what's my problem? Or what's my excuse? Like, all these people had trauma and they're trying to cover up trauma. I just like to party. But I think we all get to where we get, in our own ways. What I want to ask you specifically is the Baha'i faith. First of all, I didn't know much about it. And I think there's a lot of people that probably don't really know much about it. But I think it's interesting being raised in, an ardent religious faith and still having so much underlying angst. Tell me how those two things kind of meshed, especially for you as a youngster.
That was especially jarring, was to be raised in a faith tradition that prizes love and unity, cooperation, and building bonds of friendship. And so as a Baha'i, I would go to meetings and we would be singing songs about love and unity and having discussions about love and unity and trying to do community work that built love and unity at the grassroots level. And then I would come home and my parents would barely talk. They didn't really hug. There was just not a lot of love in the room. And when you're 8, 9, 11, 13 years old, that can be incredibly disconcerting. And I think a lot of people that have undergone some kind of like religious trauma, I wouldn't say that I've been religiously traumatized, but this is an aspect of religious trauma, which is the kind of hypocrisy of like what a religion purports and then what the reality is at home. So I would have much rather had a loving, vital, warm home life than a warm, loving, vital religious life and a kind of barren, disconnected home life. That'll mix you up.
That'll really mix you up. So at that point in your kind of youth into your 20s, I understand there was a break. I want to hear about rebellious Rainn, bohemian Rainn in New York City, and finally rock bottom Rainn. Because what I like to hear from people is like, what is that moment where the switch flipped?
So basically, I got out of acting school. And at that juncture in my life, I didn't want anything to do with religion or faith or spirituality or morality, certainly not morality. I just wanted to be an artist living in New York City, doing the things that artists do in New York City.
What are those things? Can you tell me some stories about that time?
Well, I have a lot of salacious stories, some of which can be found in my book, The Bassoon King. Oh, look, here, I just happen to have a copy right here. What a coincidence. The Bassoon King, My Life in Art, Faith, and Idiocy, just about growing up. I went through some periods of hardcore drug abuse. I wasn't passing out with a needle in my eyeball in the gutter, but I definitely used too much drugs. And then a very long period of time where basically I medicated myself with alcohol. So for me, that was pretty much daily use of some kind of alcohol just to get me through. And when I finally quit, before I got into program, when I finally just quit cold turkey, because I realized how dependent I was on it, then my anxiety flared up in all kinds of other different ways. But just went through some hard times, had crippling anxiety attacks that would leave me on the floor, shaking. I one time woke up on Christmas morning and smoked what I thought was weed. It must have been laced with someone because I had this really bad panic attack that it was like heart palpitations, sweating, came inches from calling 911 a number of different times. And in the course of that, I saw the face of God. So I actually saw the face of God on Christmas morning. And I swore to the face of God I wasn't going to do drugs again. So that was helpful. So that's when I just kind of turned to alcohol to medicate myself.
What did she look like, God?
She looked a lot like a QVC host. What I saw in the face of God, and I knew it was the face of God, was like an abstract oil painting of this limitless horizon. And it was yellow and gold with streaks of green and blue. It was very abstract. It wasn't even like a face as much as it was like this incredible, abstract, gorgeous landscape. It reminded me of like a Mark Rothko painting. Later, I went to the Rothko Chapel in Houston, which is a really beautiful kind of church that was converted into an art gallery, a kind of a full immersion art gallery. And then I was like, oh, that's the closest I've seen to the face of God. So that kind of opened my mind and my heart to a lot of different spiritual paths that I started investigating that, really helped get me out of this situation.
So you started to dabble in spirituality. Did you kind of find it right away? Did you return to your religion at all? Or what did that journey look like?
I started exploring spirituality because, frankly, in the 90s, I didn't know what else to do. Therapy wasn't an option. I didn't have any money. There weren't really self-help books or apps or podcasts or YouTube series or anything like that. So I just started reading about the world's great religions, looking for some kind of path or some kind of answer. I kind of thought, well, perhaps having jettisoned my faith several years back, perhaps the way out is to look for some deeper meaning. The first question that I had to ask myself is, was there a God or not? Even though I had seen the face of God at a certain point there. I forget when that journey started, if it was before or after I saw the face of God, actually. But I think that's the most important question, because if there's no God, then we are kind of advanced monkeys that have consciousness, and life doesn't have any meaning beyond the meaning that you give to it. We're a random assortment of molecules and energy and atoms that have consciousness, and we're having this conversation right now. Or if there is a creator, well, then what does this creative force, cosmic kind of power want from us? How does it want us to behave? What kind of path does it want us to walk? What does that journey look like? And I wasn't looking at it from like a Christian perspective or a Baha'i perspective. I was reading a lot of Buddhism and the Bhagavad Gita, and I was reading a lot about Native American spirituality. And I stumbled on this idea from the Lakota Sioux of their name for God or a higher power, which is Wakantanka, which literally translates as the great mystery. I think we all struggle with God sometimes, and especially God being patriarchal, like you joked about she, but God is this male patriarchal man with a beard on a cloud, scowling and being really judgmental of us, like some kind of like mean daddy. In my book, Soul Boom, I call him Sky Daddy.
Yeah.
And how do we get away from God as Sky Daddy? And how do we get closer to a conception of God like Wakantanka, like the great mystery? Because to me, I could get behind something called the great mystery, but I really struggled with, the older kind of Judeo-Christian ideas around God. So that started my path. And I read a lot of books and prayed and meditated. I went to a lot of different kinds of meetings. Ultimately, I did go back to the faith of my childhood, to the Baha'i faith. It was that investigation that sparked the book Soul Boom. I know we're getting to that a little bit later, which was born out of my mental health crisis. And frankly, because I was in pain, I was in anguish. I didn't know how to live a life. I was headed down some very dark pathways. So in a weird way, now in my 50s, I look back and I'm really grateful for what I went through, because it forced me to dig deeper and to not just kind of live a superficial life of comforts, but to seek a deeper meaning and explore kind of more mystical, metaphysical possibilities about what it is to be a human being. And this has fed a lot of my work as a writer and podcaster in the subsequent years.